Tonight's Channel 4 News is presented now by Zina Badawi and Shanaz Pakravan. It's 7 o'clock.
Israeli and Palestinian negotiators move forward on peace, but can they sell the deal to their leaders? Good evening. Is it stalemate being talked up as progress, or has there been a real breakthrough in the Palestinian-Israeli peace talks in Cairo? The leader of the Israeli delegation, Foreign Minister Shimon Peres, says that after 3 days of talks, there's been a broad meeting of minds, but the Palestinians appear less upbeat. Tonight, we examine the state of the negotiations and assess how substantial the remaining differences are between the two sides. And we ask whether the growing rifts in the PLO leadership are reducing the negotiating weight of the Palestinian delegation. Also tonight, as the IRA says it's refusing to renounce violence despite insisting it wants peace, a former loyalist gunman at home for Christmas says inmates at the Maze prison sense the troubles will soon be over. Sudan says Britain is trying to hijack a visit by the Archbishop of Canterbury after he refuses the regime's hospitality. Russia's ultra-nationalist Zhirinovsky is barred from Germany. We reveal what he told a far-right rally there earlier this year, and a special report on how black Britons seeking a new life in Jamaica face discrimination and harassment instead. The latest round of Middle East peace talks have ended in Cairo with what the Israelis have described as a broad agreement between the two sides. The discussions have focused on Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and Jericho. Although the Palestinian team has indicated that issues including border crossings remain unresolved, attention is shifting tonight away from the talks themselves. Now there's concern over reaction from the leaders of the two sets of negotiators. Yasser Arafat, the PLO chairman, has flown to Cairo for urgent talks amid signs of a rift within the PLO. Cyrus Shah in London reports on the latest developments in the peace process.
3 days of stiff negotiations in Cairo seemed finally to be bearing fruit. Negotiators from the two sides said they had agreed on a framework to resolve issues blocking an Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and Jericho. The Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres told reporters his country had reached a broad agreement.
The two delegations have reached a meeting of the minds on the 3 or 4 major issues, which is the passages on the bridge, the Jericho area, and some items concerning the Gaza Strip. The situation is that now the leaderships of the two parties have to approve or reject this paper.
And the Palestinian negotiator Mahmoud Abbas seemed cautiously optimistic.
We hope to reach comprehensive agreement about the main disputed points, basically the matter of the border crossings, Gaza and Jericho.
But there were doubts that the two sides' leaderships would follow suit and approve the agreement.
I hope that we shall have the leaders follow the wisdom of the delegation.
And indeed, as the negotiators left, the Palestinian leadership in Tunis had already announced its rejection of the Israeli position. The PLO chairman, Yasser Arafat, said that he would travel to Cairo to discuss the obstacles with the Egyptian mediators in person.
Arafat clearly would like to get a deal, but he is in a way benefiting by being seen not to jump at everything the Israelis offer. And precisely because he's been criticized by the Islamic fundamentalists, he's been criticized by all sorts of left-wing people who feel left out, he's been criticized by people who haven't got jobs they expected to do. It doesn't do him any harm to pause a little bit. I think if he paused for 6 months, he'd be in deep trouble. But if he pauses for a few days and says he wants to look at the agreement, that's something else. And people say Arafat's difficult to work with. I can't think of anyone who's influenced the 20th century who wasn't difficult to work with.
It's a far cry from the fanfare that surrounded the signing of a peace agreement between Israel and the PLO in Washington in September. The accord, officially ending nearly 3 decades of enmity, came in a hastily organized White House ceremony just 3 days after the two sides recognized each other. The details of the agreement in principle were left to be thrashed out later, but the loose wording of the accord has created bitter disputes in the current talks. Israel missed its December 13th deadline to withdraw as the two sides argued. How much land surrounding Jericho should be given to the Palestinians is a major sticking point, which the negotiators believe they've now settled. The Palestinians are still demanding total control of crossings to the two areas. Israel, which maintains strict controls on Palestinians at border points, has offered joint monitoring. It's not enough, said the PLO.
Issues which really blocked these talks still existed. I mean, there's no final agreement, especially about border crossing, which is, I believe, is very complicated issue. It does concern the Palestinian a lot because, you know, they want a full control of this border crossing. Otherwise, it will be meaningless. The whole accord will be meaningless.
Israel insists that controlling the border points is a matter of its national security, and Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin has said he will not be rushed into signing a bad deal. But as Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and Jericho prepare for limited autonomy, both the Israeli and the Palestinian leaderships know that the pressure is on to conclude a deal.
Cyrus Shah reporting. And in the last few moments, the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister Yossi Beilin has said that he believes Israel's withdrawal from Gaza and Jericho can be completed by an April the 13th deadline. We're joined now from Jerusalem by Uri Dromi, who's a senior Israeli government spokesman. Mr. Dromi, can you shed more light by that statement that Mr. Yossi Beilin has just made?
I subscribe to this statement. I mean, the most important date indeed is April the 13th, and generally we have 6 months, 2 months to conclude the agreement and 4 months to implement it. Even if we change the internal division of time and we give the agreement more time and then we leave the implementation less time, we can still meet the crucial date of April, and I'm sure we'll reach it.
But the PLO and Israel appear to be giving conflicting accounts of the results of the talks in Cairo. What exactly has or has not been agreed?
Well, obviously I can't go into details because as we speak our delegation is heading back, and we are not going to elaborate on it before they brief the Prime Minister himself. But unfortunately the Palestinians rushed to make statements from Tunis even before their delegation left Cairo. I think what happened there that Israel went out of its way to, on one hand, secure its national security, especially in the issue of the borders and the crossings, and on the other hand, to be very forthcoming when it comes to the demands of the Palestinians. As it seems right now, the Palestinians are not too happy about our proposals, but that's the nature of negotiation. You always get from the negotiation less than you expected. I'm sure that sooner or later we'll come to the common ground.
But the PLO in Tunis are accusing you of not honouring the agreement by insisting on Israeli control of the crossing points. That hardly sounds like Palestinian autonomy, does it?
I think we should go back into the Declaration of Principles signed in Oslo and or agreed in Oslo and signed in Washington, and realize that the Declaration of Principles calls for leaving the overall security and the external security in the hands of Israel, which means control of the borders. No country in its right mind will relinquish the control of its border to other people. So I think we shouldn't indulge now in exchange of accusations or things like this, but rather go back, brief our leaders, and go back to the negotiation table. By the way, I was there in Washington in September when in the ceremony, and I know the Middle East will never be the same. So we need to give some more time and goodwill, and we'll come to a common ground.
You mentioned briefing the leaders. Do you think that the Israeli leadership and the PLO leadership will accept the draft agreement?
It's a hypothetical question. I can only speak for our sides. About our side, I don't know much lately. And if one reads the British papers about him, one has concerns. But I'm sure that whatever our delegation in Cairo presented or put on the table was with a strong consultation with Mr. Rabin, and I'm sure what we saw in Cairo was a firm and sound and reasonable Israeli position. I hope the same will come from the Palestinian side.
You say you don't know very much about Mr. Arafat's position, but surely you are aware that there are growing rifts within the PLO leadership. Is this going to hamper a deal, in your view?
I hope not. We still are committed to dealing with the leadership of the PLO, but there's so much we can do to accommodate their internal problems. We, all Israelis, and especially the Israeli leadership, we're looking forward to see that Arafat examines our proposals and come with a reasonable response. And I hope we don't see some kind of a deterioration of the Palestinian position because of internal feuds.
Uri Dromi in Jerusalem, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here, the IRA said tonight that it was not prepared to abandon violence even though it wanted peace. It was the first substantive response by the provisionals to the Downing Street Declaration between Britain and Ireland. At the same time, Channel 4 News has discovered that loyalist prisoners in Northern Ireland may be in favour of the initiative. A former loyalist paramilitary convicted of murder, who has now renounced violence and no longer has any links with the paramilitary group, says many inmates back the move. Alex Thompson in Belfast has been speaking to him and monitoring the IRA's response to the Downing Street Declaration.
Ever since the Downing Street Declaration was published, Republicans have been repeating often and again that they will need further clarification on the document. But today's New Year statement from the Provisional IRA is at least their first fairly considered response to the declaration. In it, the organisation has clearly tried to blend an apparent desire to end the armed conflict with defiance that it will continue if it doesn't get what it wants from the British and Irish governments. The IRA statement says our struggle has endured and outlasted one British offensive after another. It remains solid and instant. The British government holds the key to peace. The IRA wants peace. The statement went on, if the political will exists or can be created, then there is a real hope that a basis for peace can be established. At the same time today, there was an insight as to how paramilitary prisoners on both sides are viewing the current situation in the Maze prison. Billy Giles, home for Christmas in East Belfast. 11 years into a life sentence for murder, this former UVF gunman said in his only television interview that many in the Maze prison now seriously believe a chance for peace is at hand. Because of the government broadcasting ban, we can't transmit his voice.
It's not a nice place. The Maze is not a nice place to be. Nobody likes to be in prison. But I think if you can describe it as being happy, they're happy because they know, they have the sense that the Troubles is finished. My own opinion would be that the Troubles has finished. Hopefully they have.
Billy Giles shot dead Michael Fay, a Roman Catholic, in 1982. When asked what he would say now to Mr. Fay's family, he replied, there are no words in the dictionary to describe his remorse. He believes loyalist prisoners inside the Maze broadly welcome the Anglo-Irish Declaration, and he also says IRA prisoners are looking for an end to the violence.
They're looking, I think the Republican movement is looking a way out. Maybe the Declaration, hopefully the Declaration is a way out for them. It's not going to bring peace about itself, I don't think, from a Republican point of view, but it's a start.
Tomorrow, the Tullycarnet estate will be just a memory again as Billy Giles returns to the Maze. Like many inside and outside, he believes any kind of peace deal must involve a change in the status of paramilitary prisoners.
I was what you could call an extreme loyalist. I would accept that the Republican prisoners are political prisoners, just the same as the fellas in the UVF blocks or the UFF blocks. They're all political prisoners, you know. You can't have a war ending and leave the prisoners behind. That'd be like Britain having the Germans at the table in 1945 and saying, right, the POWs that's left in Germany, the war's over, boys, cheerio. You can't do that, you know.
Republican prisoners coming out from the maze over Christmas have declined to make any public comment about the Downing Street Declaration, but at a public meeting last night, not one voice in more than 400 Republicans was raised to defend the declaration. That, together with today's New Year's statement by the Provisional IRA, indicates that acceptance by Republicans of the declaration is not going to be an easy or straightforward matter. Alex Thompson, Channel 4 News, Belfast.
After the break, the diplomatic row which caused the Archbishop of Canterbury to curb his visit to Sudan, plus what the ultra-nationalist Russian leaders said to the German extreme right. And a special report on the way we'll work in the future, as traditional industries decline, how women are starting to dominate the jobs market.
The new Volvo 440, airbag included.
What would you say if we told you that at weekends, a 3-minute national call now costs only 10p?
Don't worry, Mummy. It's only 5 weeks till half-term.
The new reduced national weekend rate from BT.
We, the undersigned, think it's time for a new kind of credit card.
We're looking for a credit card that charges no annual fee.
We'd welcome a credit card that charged low interest.
We think our loyalty should be rewarded by more than just another bill.
Last year, over 8 million Americans signed here. The new GM credit card offers a unique combination of benefits. It charges no annual fee. And you can get a rebate towards a new GM car.
The fastest growing credit card in America is now here. And the rebate towards a new Vauxhall could be £2,500 over 5 years.
If you'd like the new GM credit card from Vauxhall, sign here.
Germany has banned a visit by Vladimir Zhirinovsky, the ultra-nationalist Russian politician, on the grounds that it might harm German interests. Mr. Zhirinovsky learnt of the ban as he waited to leave Bulgaria following his expulsion for urging the overthrow of the president there. Bonn declared it had good reason to bar the politician who once said that Moscow should drop nuclear bombs on Germany if it meddled in Russian affairs. Channel 4 News has obtained pictures of Mr. Zhirinovsky attending a rally of far-right sympathisers in Germany in October. Paul Simpson of our Moscow bureau reports.
This evening, Mr. Zhirinovsky arrived back in Moscow from the Bulgarian capital, Sofia. The Bulgarians had given him 24 hours to leave after he allegedly called on the country's president to resign. It seems he suggested that one of his friends, a Bulgarian businessman, should become the country's new president. This morning, Mr. Zhirinovsky called a news conference in Sofia to deny that he had made any such remarks. He said he had come to Bulgaria to rest at a health farm. He was the innocent victim of a misunderstanding.
The journalist has distorted the facts and has told the people that I've brought a new president to Bulgaria. But I just came here to enjoy the baths. What has the president got to do with it?
His short trip to Bulgaria got off to a difficult start last week. When he arrived to lay flowers at a monument to Russian soldiers in the heart of Sofia, he was met by a large demonstration. He was jeered and booed by 500 protesters who tried to stop him from reaching the monument. A few days before that, he was skiing in the Austrian mountains, a guest, according to his advisors, of industrialists and businessmen. Everywhere he was followed by journalists, apparently enjoying his newfound fame. On his way to Austria, he stopped off in Germany, where he met Gerhard Frey, the leader of the extreme right-wing German People's Union, who he described as a close friend. It's not a new friendship. In October, Zhirinovsky was with Dr. Frey at a meeting of the German People's Union. Zhirinovsky was a guest speaker. He told the audience that he wanted a harmonious border between Germany and Russia. That would seem to leave in doubt the status of Poland, which lies between the two countries.
I don't know what the Germans think of their eastern border, but Russia needs an extended, friendly border with Germany.
That was clearly well received by his audience. Mr. Zhirinovsky's foreign contacts have increased speculation in Moscow over where his party funds have come from. During the Russian election, he ran one of the most expensive and successful television campaigns, reportedly spending more than 1 billion rubles, far more than any of the other more established political parties. But the organizers of his so-called Liberal Democratic Party deny that any money was received from foreign organizations. They say that all their money came from donations from party members.
There is another explanation, basically that the money is coming from abroad, and in particular from the European right. Zhirinovsky tries to make sure that he is supported by the European right, and there are a number of hints that probably he got some money from Germany.
In the days following his election success, Mr. Zhirinovsky was at pains to moderate his image and his language, denying he had ever called for the annexation of Poland or of the former Soviet republics, and he assured his critics that membership of his new Greater Russia would be purely voluntary. The comments Mr. Zhirinovsky made during his trip have undoubtedly done further damage to his image abroad. Yet here, his popularity amongst the Russian people appears to have been unaffected. Paul Simpson, Channel 4 News, Moscow.
A reminder of this evening's headlines so far. The Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister Yossi Beilin said tonight that Israel's withdrawal from Gaza and Jericho could still be completed by April the 13th. It came as Israeli and Palestinian negotiators said they'd reached broad agreement at the Middle East peace talks. But there are doubts whether the negotiators can convince their leaders over what they've settled amid signs of a rift within the PLO. Now with more of the day's news, here's Shahnaz Pakravan.
Sudan has angrily accused Britain of hijacking a visit by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. George Carey. The outburst follows the Archbishop's announcement that he's cancelled a trip to the Muslim north of the country rather than go as an official guest of Sudan's military government. His visit will be confined to the rebel-held south.
Large numbers of Christians have been displaced by the civil war between the southern-based Sudan People's Liberation Army and the ruling military council, which imposes an Islamic state in the north. The Archbishop of Canterbury's decision not to be an official guest of the government during a visit to the north means that he won't be able to see the conditions for Christians driven there by the fighting, or meet Bishop Peter L. Bersh, who was reportedly flogged under Islamic law, a punishment condemned by Dr. Carey.
The Archbishop always goes as the guest of a church. He doesn't go as the guest of a government because that's not his position. That means that they would have controlled the program. And in fact, I had a conversation earlier with a representative of the Sudanese embassy in London who said that the Archbishop would be doing this, this and this. And that would have meant that he wouldn't have free access to people he wanted to see or places he wanted to visit.
The government is there to invite people to see for themselves. That is the only way to beat the distorted image of the Sudan internationally, because the Sudan hasn't got the facilities and the satellites and all the things to send its message out. And that has been an organized policy of the government to allow everybody to come and see the truth for himself.
Since formal independence from British colonial administration in the 50s, there have been continuing tensions and outbreaks of civil war between the south of the country and the north. The northern ruling military council, led by General Omar Hassan al-Bashir, has been stepping up the campaign against the Sudan People's Liberation Army in the south. The general's government has been accused of abuse of human rights, and aid to the area has been limited as a result.
Apart from the government, the people of Sudan, regardless of their denomination, whether they are Muslims or Christians or animists, probably they would welcome this visit by Dr. Kerry in the south, ignoring the government, ignoring the north, because of the appalling record of human rights and Sudanese government oppression against its own people, not just the Christians, but the Muslims and the animists.
The Archbishop of Canterbury and his wife Arlene are due to fly to Nairobi in Kenya this evening and then travel on to southern Sudan, where they will be able to assess at first hand the problems of a region where the fighting has forced hundreds of thousands from their homes.
The Home Secretary, Michael Howard, has criticised the local authority which sent a young offender on a tour of Africa as having more money than sense. A row flared after the teenager was arrested for suspected drink driving 3 days after returning home. But the director of the centre, which organised the £7,000 trip, said it wasn't intended as a deterrent.
I can't emphasise enough that we do not send young people on holiday. We send people on intensive, individual therapeutic programmes, and these take place abroad. And there's a very marked difference between going on holiday and going abroad for an intensive treatment programme.
A third incendiary device has been blown up by the bomb squad inside a Boots store in Cornwall. All the devices were hidden inside hair care products. One was defused at a woman's home after she found it inside a colouring kit. The government has launched a new anti-smoking campaign which will cost £12 million over the next 3 years. A new advertisement will offer advice for those trying to give up and will warn of the dangers of passive smoking.
Now, look, I want to be serious for a minute. Smoking doesn't just give you bad breath, smelly clothes, and yellow fingers. It can actually kill you. And it's murder on your children.
Abroad, in the United States, 2 men and a woman are being charged in connection with a series of bomb attacks in New York State, which killed 5 members of the same family. 6 parcel bombs were delivered last night to members of the Fowler family. 4 went off, killing the 5 victims and wounding 2 others. Police said the attacks were sparked by a family vendetta. The Walt Disney chairman, Michael Eisner, has described Euro Disney's financial performance as dreadful and our first real financial disappointment. But he promised shareholders he would not let the theme park jeopardize the company's financial health. This year, Euro Disney lost almost £600 million. A Belgian man and his Algerian-born wife have been found dead in their home in the town of Bouira, 50 miles southeast of Algiers. 25 foreigners have been killed in Algeria in the past 3 months after a Muslim fundamentalist group warned them to leave the country or face sudden death.
Positive signals about a recovery in the housing market were well received by the city. Limited post-Christmas trading was also stimulated by a rise in business optimism reported by the Institute of Directors. On the foreign exchanges, sterling rose 1.7 pfennigs against the German mark, but the pound fell against an even stronger dollar by just under a cent. And the stock market, shares rose to record levels with the Financial Times index of 100 leading shares rising over 49 points. It was Kenneth Clarke's November budget that marked the turning point for UK shares after a year's underperformance compared to European stock markets. Although the end-of-year period is traditionally a good time for shares, this year there are further reasons for investors' optimism. The Financial Times index of 100 leading shares remained broadly flat during October and November, but since the budget at the end of November, shares have begun to pick up strongly to their current levels.
Well, the stock market usually does quite well at this time of year. People have new money to put into the market, and that usually boosts share prices. At the same time, there have been a number of favourable factors which have helped to boost the stock market. The budget was very favourably received last November. Inflation has continued to drop, and spending has increased quite sharply in the run-up to Christmas.
But the budget does contain a sting in its tail, with large tax increases due to bite from March and April onwards. That's likely to affect consumer confidence, but not to the extent of damaging the recovery. But one sector of the economy which is likely to see continuing difficulties throughout the new year is the jobs market. With unemployment above the 2.5 million mark, many of the people without work are from traditional labour-intensive industries now in decline. Increasingly, the new jobs are going to women. In the first of a series of special reports on our working lives, our economics correspondent Steve Levinson looks at what lies behind this shift and on the changes that so many jobs for the girls may trigger.
This was once the steel capital of the world. In its heyday, Sheffield produced half the steel in Europe. Made in Sheffield, engraved on teaspoons and girders alike, was a guarantee of quality. In those pre-war days, there were 176 furnaces in the city. The industry employed around 90,000 people. Virtually all of them were men. Manufacturing and manual labour went together. Now that's all changed. As manufacturing has dwindled, it's men who find they're no longer in demand.
This is a revolution compared with the 1950s and the early 1960s, when the workforce was dominated by men. What we've seen right through the 1980s has been women's jobs being created and men's jobs tending to disappear. And that's clearly going to go on right through the 1990s. There'll be over 750,000 more women in work by the year 2000 than there were in 1991, and about 250,000 fewer men.
Steelworking still goes on in Sheffield, but as elsewhere in manufacturing, the techniques have changed. Today the city produces as much steel as it ever did, but the workforce is only 1/8 of its previous size, and companies demand different skills.
At one time, it would be true to say that the company would be 80% unskilled, semi-skilled, and about 20% skilled. We are reversing that trend now. Because of the new plant and equipment we've got, we are having to train people up on new skills and new awareness and new innovations. We are looking at multi-skilling and flexibility so that we can give continuous production.
The hard truth is that even where manufacturing survives and prospers, it's no longer labour-intensive. Only 300 employees are needed here. Old machinery is constantly scrapped. These days, the key to success is new labour-saving investment. 2/3 of the output is exported mainly to America. But for all the modern techniques, one thing hasn't changed. This remains a male-dominated world.
We very rarely get females applying for shop floor positions. I've been here 12 years and I've had one application, but unfortunately with that lady, she desired not to be interviewed. It's a sad reflection, I think, on our society that women don't feel that they can come into our industry. And I think we as, not just we as a company, but we as UK have got to help women to be more confident that they can come into industry and play a worthwhile part.
But these days, women can afford to cold shoulder the steelworks. There are plenty of other jobs. The Meadow Hall shopping centre, one of Europe's largest, is right next door and staffed mainly by women. Ironically, it was once the site of a steelworks employing 5,000 men. The switch symbolises Britain's move from manufacturing to services, from jobs for the boys to jobs for the girls. The impact of this change can be seen in a battle of the sexes being fought out in job centres up and down the country. It's men who are searching, often in vain, for job opportunities, while women are in ever-increasing demand. The process has been accelerating throughout much of the past decade, and has now reached the point where the unemployment rate for men is almost twice as high as that for women.
You got an accent. You eat the positive or eat limb. Money for negative, latch on to the affirmative. Don't mess with Mr. In Between.
And this is the positive side of the story. It's where the jobs are and where the workers are women. First Direct is a bank with no high street branches. Instead, all its transactions are carried out by phone from Leeds. The idea's caught on, with 700 new jobs this year alone. They're the jobs of the future, but 3/4 of them have gone to women.
We never set out with that as an intention, of course, but I think what has happened is we're providing a flexibility which women find particularly attractive, particularly where they have got small children. And I think the other thing is that by nature, a female voice sounds more bright and chirpy, I think, on the telephone. I'm not saying that men can't as well, but maybe that's part of the reason as well. But we certainly do have a higher proportion of women on our staff than men.
The company gets flexible hours from its staff, and the workers get benefits too. A big one is the creche. It's provided by the company and takes 100 children a week. It's planned to take 100 more next year. It's part of a benefit package available to both full-time and part-time staff.
In many industries where people employ part-timers, the benefits packages that would be offered wouldn't be consistent with those for full-time. And I think that's a key issue for First Direct. Our contract of employment is standard regardless of the numbers of hours that you work. So any benefits that accrue on an hourly basis. So if you work a 16-hour week versus a 32-hour week, you get half the holiday entitlement. You know, the pension scheme, the private health care, the creche is open and available to everybody.
But studies show not all companies are as enlightened as this. Experts say other groups of women workers are much worse off.
At the bottom, you're getting a lot of women moving into very low-paid, very insecure jobs, sometimes part-time, but not all of them part-time, where they can't make enough money to support themselves, their children, their families on their own, and where they're exploited by employers, and they can be got rid of very easily, and they don't have security against dismissal, they don't have pension rights, they don't have access to training and to promotion and so on.
But leading academics say the real problem ahead is not better conditions for women, but finding work of any sort for millions of men.
I feel that a big challenge for policymakers in the 1990s and beyond will be to how they respond to this male unemployment problem, so that they can, in a sense, become more like women and more attractive to employers in terms of their flexibility and their adaptability.
But what about the workers?
Women are coming into their own as far as work's concerned. We're having careers, we're entitled to have a career, why shouldn't we?
Women are just showing themselves in the true colours now. They're not just stood behind the sink or doing the washing and the ironing, the cooking, the cleaning. They're actually using the brains at last, and it's coming out that women can do this.
But at the steelworks, they hold a more traditional view.
Yeah, you've got a wife and your children to keep. You've got to support them. So once you've got a regular job, you know the income's there each week. You know where you stand.
Old ideas die hard. Your father's probably been the main breadwinner of the family. And I think it'd be difficult for some men to sit back and let their wife bring all the money into the home.
When these children grow up, they'll all be fighting hard for a dwindling number of jobs. In the new working world, they'll have no choice but to accept that old habits really have to die. Steve Levinson, Channel 4 News in Yorkshire.
After the break, no place like home. Life in Jamaica conjures up images of a sun-drenched, rum-soaked paradise. But for black families moving there from Britain to find their roots, the reality can be a future of poverty, crime and rejection.
In Singapore with Singapore Airlines from just £559. Contact your travel agent or call 0345 343434 for details.
What was World War II really like for the men and women who fought in it?
Some of the equipment we've not trained with. They'd only joined us when we started fighting.
Find out in Images of War, a fortnightly publication that uses eyewitness and previously unpublished material to re-examine the crucial campaigns. Strategic battle maps, historical documents, reprints of newspapers of the day let you relive the war. Get Images of War and see World War II through the eyes of the people who fought it. Part 1 costs just 30 pence.
Tales of the Black Horse, the Four Rings. Once there was a dying king with 2 daughters. To see which would inherit his wealth, he set a riddle.
For untold dosh and sparkly things, the answer lies within 4 rings.
This puzzled the girls mightily. One espies 4 accursed stone rings and slips off to fight demons, goblins, orcs, etc., etc. The other uses her head. She knew all about the Lloyds Bank pledge to answer all calls
1
within 4 rings.
2 3.
Good afternoon, Lloyds Bank.
He left me as much as that.
Which means you won't be left dangling on the end of a line. The 4-ring pledge, another legendary service from Lloyds Bank.
Following the row over visiting Jamaicans deported from Britain at Christmas, there's concern about black Britons who go to the Caribbean to resettle there of their own free will. Earlier this year, the Labour MP Bernie Grant claimed that as many as 40% of black Britons wanted to leave. In a controversial suggestion, he said they should be offered grants to return to their countries of origin. But many who do go to Jamaica find that life is not as peaceful as they would have hoped, as Charlotte Fadipi reports from the island.
There's a land that I have heard about so far across the sea.
This is the way many West Indians remember Jamaica. In the 50s and 60s, they left the Caribbean to come to Britain seeking a better life. Now, many of their children are planning to go back. Over the last 2 years, about 50 people a week have been returning home to Jamaica, bringing with them their property and their dreams. For Bobby Wright, reality is dawning. The dream of returning to his roots hasn't quite worked out. He's taken Bernie Grant at his word and is using his savings to help rebuild his country. With his redundancy pay from 18 years' work with the London Underground, he wanted to open a restaurant and bar. But Jamaica's high inflation and 40% interest rates means his plans are now on hold. Instead, he's driving tourists around the island. Bobby admits it's frustrating at times.
Oh, well, you know, it's difficult, you know. But put it this way, sometimes if you go into deep thought about things, and it can get you down, you know, and I try not to do that. You know, I just try to focus on what I want, you know, and you know, at weekends we go to the beach and we relax, you know, where that's something I can't do in England, you know.
While trying to get things sorted, Bobby and his family are staying with his mother. His wife Angela was born in London of Jamaican parentage, but in the Caribbean she's teased about her British accent and English clothes.
They call English, and English pound. You know, if you drive up into the market, they just flock you, English pound. But at first it was frightening, but, and my daughter was with me and she was, oh, what's this? But I've always gone, at first I always went with someone who knew the area. You know, I just didn't go out on my own at first.
For the children, the move to Jamaica has also been difficult. 13-year-old Jade misses her friends in England and is struggling with her homework. The different standards of teaching means her parents had to hire a private tutor. Settling into school has not been easy.
Here it's dirty and the roof is like caving in on you, and in England it was really pretty and we had carpets and stuff, and we had lots of computers, and I haven't seen a computer over there.
I feel the rich get richer here and the poor get poorer. But, I mean, there's poor in England, Cardboard City. I mean, it's on a bigger scale here because it's a third world country.
The Wrights live in Mandeville, a wealthy part of Jamaica. Many returning residents settle here because of the cool climate. In fact, Mandeville is nicknamed Little London. In the last 20 years, its population has more than doubled. But many others have to go to the capital, Kingston, the main centre of commerce. To the unsuspecting visitor, Kingston can be a dangerous place. Last year, there were 630 murders in Jamaica, half of them occurring in Kingston and St. Catherine. In fact, 70% of all Jamaica's crime occurs in this area, which is just 20 square miles. Even those who know the area are wary of it. Leighton Levy is a crime reporter on the country's biggest newspaper. The increasing crime rate has forced him to apply to carry a gun on all his assignments.
There's a mentality among the people in the inner city of a get-rich-quick mentality, which they're not prepared to work like everybody else to make a living, so they resort to violence, robberies, coke, which has somehow come on to our shores over the last 2 or 3 years. And it has affected the nature of the crime. Crime has become a lot more violent because of the usage of cocaine, usage of crack.
Homemade guns like these can be bought for as little as £15 in parts of Kingston. Every year the police seize hundreds of weapons, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. It may be an unusually high crime rate compared to the rest of the Caribbean, but it's an issue many may have to confront if they come to Jamaica.
From Miami, come right down to the tip of South America. You do have a lot of drug trade going on, you know, and because we are right in the midst of everything, and guns follow.
The gun culture has been adopted by Robert Bell, who bought his pistol to protect his family when he returned. A former Eurobond dealer in the City of London, he moved to Kingston 4 years ago. But he and his wife Debbie admit that starting a new life has not been easy.
If crime was to be reduced in Jamaica, then most of our problems would be solved. If you stay out of drugs or politics, then that's 90% of your problems solved. Apart from that, you stay out of the areas where, you know, like the ghettos or the poorer areas, where, you know, you'll be more susceptible to crime. You know, if you drive my wife will drive around anywhere in Kingston apart from certain areas. You know, you know, in these areas you're going there, but you'll get people rob you. Just because they think you must, looking at you, they'll say, okay, her chain is worth something, or she's got, or the car that you drive or something. You know?
So they know how to target you in a way.
They can pick you out, yes.
Jamaica's impoverished economy has contributed to its crime problem, which has left 2 returning residents dead in the past year and others at risk.
They tend to travel with large sums of money when going to the bank, exposing it, giving it to somebody who they do not know to hold for them, going into precarious deals.
Sometimes they make down payments on real estate only to come here and discover that the real estate is more imagined than real.
But still they come. Tons of goods pass through Kingston Harbour every week. There are 2.5 million Jamaicans living abroad, equivalent to the country's entire population. If the influx continues, can Jamaica cope?
Right now, I don't think Jamaica is ready for all these returning residents, because right now I don't see where the government is going to put all these people.
We have more people in Jamaica searching for jobs than those who are working.
They can help to build our country.
Barbecue by the poolside. The Wrights spend their evenings doing what many West Indians in Britain dream about. Returning to their roots, hoping for a better life, is a seductive idea. But does it turn out that way? After years in the UK, being accepted in their own country is proving much more of a struggle than they thought.
Charlotte for DP reporting. And the main news again, the IRA said tonight that it refuses to renounce violence despite insisting that it wants peace. A former loyalist gunman has told Channel 4 News that many inmates of the Maze prison welcomed the Downing Street Declaration between Britain and Ireland. And Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister Yossi Beilin says the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and Jericho is still on course for next April. The Israeli negotiating team at the Cairo peace talks has said there's broad agreement, but the Foreign Minister Shimon Peres warned tonight that it could be weeks before a plan is finally settled. And the PLO chairman Yasser Arafat has flown into Cairo amid fears of a rift within the PLO. We're back at the same time tomorrow. That's 7 o'clock. That's Channel 4 News. Goodbye.